Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Simon Edwards at Pumacom over on X, and you're watching Heat Seeker Sports. We're doing a show called Gamescript, and the game that we're going to be focused on for this particular episode is the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cleveland Browns. And we got a pretty interesting game here. I'm joined by my friend Spread Astaire to help break down this game and look at some potential directions that we can go with building showdown lineups for DraftKings. Spread, what's going on, man?
Excited for this game for sure. These teams, they always play each other tough. And I think this might be the better game of the two games tonight, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's actually at Pittsburgh. I think I said it was at Cleveland. But, Cleveland are 2.5-point favorites, I believe, in this game. So you got a road team as a favorite. These are the games that Spread, I believe you like to target the home team, right?
That's right. A home dog in a division game. I think it's a fantastic opportunity here. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Cleveland's look pretty good, and we talked about it a little earlier. Other than one position, Cleveland has a much better team. So we'll see how that turns out. Yeah,
that's true. And you never know from week one. You can't read too much into what happens in week one because all these teams are rusty in week one, and we don't know, which direction they're going to go for the rest of the season. From what it looked like last week, Pittsburgh basically got stomped by the 49ers. The 49ers were able to run all over them on top of Brandon Ayuk going off, and Cleveland pulled out a win against the Bengals. So they had an impressive win in their first game. Deshaun Watson did more on the ground than he did in the air, ended up being fantasy relevant in that game, still has those lingering issues over his head. Is he still rusty? Is he going to ever be the same quarterback that we saw in Texas or the Houston Texans? We don't know which direction is going to happen with that, but he's really only played a few bad weather games at the end of last season. And then he played last week, which was also in bad weather. I believe it was raining in that game last week. So, would have affected his performance there somewhat. But, yeah, it's an interesting game here. The Browns and the Steelers in primetime seems like a game to me that could shoot out a little bit. Spread, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think about?
Let me ask you about that right off the bat, because you do an excellent job getting us prepared for these shows. So I know where we're going. I kind of have an idea before we log on here. But you sent me some notes. You said Cleveland defense looked great. Pittsburgh offense looked bad. But then the next note says, I feel like this game could go over the total. How did we reach that conclusion after one defense looked great and one offense looked bad?
So we were talking a little bit before the show about some of the scores that have been in these games in the past, and it always seems like it's either lopsided or they're going to keep it close. Now, if you look at Pittsburgh offense, like Pittsburgh has got some good weapons on that offense. They've got George Pickens. Deontay Johnson is out for this game, unfortunately, but they made it up with Calvin Austin and Allen Robinson, who kind of filled in for Deontay last week and kind of took over in that I guess slot role. But yeah, I mean they have some weapons on Pittsburgh. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren as the running backs. They got Pat Freiermuth, who also was questionable, I think, coming into this game, but it looks like he's going to play. So. Yeah, they have the weapons. And then on the Cleveland side, you obviously have Deshaun Watson. We're still waiting for him to have his breakout game since he returned. Everybody's down on Deshaun Watson, still like with him, getting that ridiculous contract and then coming back. And he hasn't looked like a top 5 quarterback. Although last week, I think he was a top 6 fantasy quarterback just because of the rushing upside. But he's got weapons in – Donovan Peoples-Jones. Amari Cooper is looking like he's questionable. He might be out tonight. But they got David Njoku. They got Nick Chubb. They got a bunch of weapons on both of these teams that, you would think would be a marquee matchup. And they're division rivals, and it's like a storied rivalry between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Some of these scores in the past, we're looking at, like Cleveland lost to Pittsburgh 14-28. Last year, they won 29-17. They lost prior year 14-26. So you see all these big, 26, like point totals on one side of these games. I just think that eventually these teams are going to break out, and we're going to see something like a 32-25 game or something like that. We're going to see some higher total game, and I think that week 2 of the season, we might see that game, even though we know that Cleveland has a pretty dominant defense. But I think the familiarity between these two teams, the offense knowing kind of not how to handle this defense, but having experience against this defense, might have a better game plan for attacking it. And same with the Cleveland side. Obviously, we're going to see Deshaun Watson breakout eventually. We're just waiting on that breakout, and he's getting closer. He's getting closer to looking like a decent quarterback again. And last week he showed that rushing upside. And I think if tonight is the night on prime time, I think this is maybe his first primetime game since he got back in the league. Tonight would be the setup for a Deshaun Watson kind of breaking out and showing that he still has the ability to be a top quarterback in the league. So
and that's going to be the question around the Cleveland Browns. Boy, this could really shy owners away from these guaranteed contracts. And I was thinking that yesterday watching the Giants and Daniel Jones, where it feels like these owners feel shoehorned into these franchise quarterbacks and leaves them with a lack of flexibility. And I don't want this to turn into the NBA where you make one bad signing and your fan base is discouraged for 3 years as you're waiting to get out of cap hell. So, Deshaun Watson's got a lot going on. But hey, going back to the question on the total, after week 1, right, it looked like it was going to be unders all year, and these teams bounced back. I know one of my favorite plays, at least statistically, was that Commanders Broncos under yesterday, and I think it was dead by halftime, right? So, not the craziest idea that this game bounces back and goes over. So just so you know, I like Pittsburgh in this game. But I'm fine with a balanced build here. What type of build did you prefer? And what was the kind of the game script that you were looking for? Pittsburgh always seems to have Cleveland's number. We have all these great Tomlin trends, right? Hashtag Tomlin trends. Coming off a loss, division underdog at home. Both are going to be completely favorable for him. So I like Pittsburgh here, and that's how I want to build. Are you going to build a balanced build? Do you want to go with a 3-3 or maybe 4-2 with Cleveland here? I'm going a little bit different than the way that I project this game.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning more on the Cleveland side. Actually, I think that Cleveland is going to be able to handle this game. We're missing Cam Hayworth, and I think that's going to be a boost for Chubb. I think Chubb and the running game are going to play a big role in this. But I think if we want to get different from the field, we can't have Chubb as the captain here, and we have to kind of look at some different captain options and try to build a story around what would happen to prevent Nick Chubb to be a captain. And we can start off maybe with a Cleveland build on this one, just so I can kind of lay out what I'm thinking in it. Now, I'm thinking if we're looking for a guy with enough upside to kind of justify not having Nick Chubb in that captain position, I think the guy that screams upside in this matchup is George Pickens, and George Pickens is pretty cheap. He's 12,000 at the captain spot. So I believe that's how much would that be as a regular? I think it's close to like 8,000-9,000, like for just a flex position on him. I do think that Chubb is going to have a big game in this, but in order to kind of explain away like why he wouldn't be in the captain, I would kind of have to put some players in here that would be vulturing touches or vulturing touchdowns away from him. So this is kind of how I'm going into this this narrative spread. Is I'm taking Deshaun Watson, like thinking that like he's going to have a potential return game here. So he also, though, I can see him vulturing touchdowns from Nick Chubb in this game. And I think that putting those two together is a way that we can get, Pickens to end up with the highest score in this game. I think if you're going to put Pickens in the captain with that narrative, I think you want to put Kenny Pickett in as well. So, Pickens, Pickett to Pickens, kind of combination there. And from there, one other guy that I thought was interesting, and if this ends up being a high total game, and we're seeing Nick Chubb, he's not the lead scorer in this game. Well, last week, Jerome Ford got about 41% of the snaps, something like that. I know it was all in garbage time for the most part, but what if Jerome Ford comes in and vultures a touchdown too? He's only at $400. You plug him in, that leaves you with $5,600, and that gives you a ton of options for whatever. If you wanted to go 4-2 with Cleveland, it gives you a bunch of Cleveland options. If you wanted to go 3-3, have the more balanced build, like Spread was talking about, it gives you those options too. But what do you think of a direction like this for kind of building a George Pickens captain build, Spread? Oh, Spread it looks like Spread dropped out. So well, that is the direction that I think for a George Pickens build. Spread likes the Steelers as well, so I don't know which direction he'll lean with going with the Steelers player. We'll see when he jumps back in here. But we can go over some of these players and options have to fill out this final spot here. Donovan Peoples-Jones. If we got Amari Cooper missing this week, that leaves a lot more targets for potentially Donovan Peoples-Jones. And if we look at last week's game that Pittsburgh played against San Francisco, Brandon Ayuk ran 43% of his routes on the left side of the field versus Pittsburgh, and he ended up getting eight receptions for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. Had a monster fantasy game. Now, Donovan Peoples-Jones ran 36% of his routes on the left side, and so did Amari Cooper. So it was a pretty balanced way that these guys were aligning. But that gives a lot of potential upside for Donovan Peoples-Jones in this game. Just knowing that situation last week. Seems like what's his face? Elijah Moore is going to be primarily a slot receiver. He got a vast majority of his alignment was in the slot last week. We're looking at 64% lining up in the middle versus 21 on the left and 14 on the right. So I don't necessarily like him as much as I like these outside receivers who are gonna kind of be splitting exposure to that left side of the field. But yeah, Spread, what are you thinking here? Who are some of your favorite plays here in the mid price range?
Excuse me, my computer froze, but I'm back. So I know you like Cleveland here, but you went with Pickens in the captain real quick, and you're not worried about the little hamstring injury at all?
I am a little bit worried. Spread, we were talking in our previous show or before our previous show, I can't remember, about how some of these teams are taking caution with some of these soft tissue injuries. And for Pickens to pop up with that hamstring injury is a little bit concerning for sure. But I just think if they lost Deontay Johnson, I think they'll take probably a less cautious approach maybe with Pickens. Maybe they'll put him in the slot a little bit more. Like maybe they'll put him on like short routes and stuff like that instead of making him like trying to trying to run deep. But I do think that Pickens has the most upside, I think, out of all these options. if we want to get away from Chubb and the captain. Watson also has, like upside, but Watson's also going to be highly owned, which is why I kind of lean Pickens. But what do you think for upside on Pittsburgh? Do you think there's any other guys that have that like captain type of upside?
No, I mean, and that's where it gets tough, right? It feels like you really have to make a gamble, and if Pittsburgh's going to continue that excellent home streak against him here, I mean, boy, Allen Robinson, no. Freiermuth, I think you could talk me into. Okay, so if I don't go with Pickens there, I think Freiermuth is the guy that I would go for here. Of course, Najee, but I think you're fine staying away from that. So Freiermuth or Najee are the only other options. Of course, Najee's going to limit the way you build a little bit. So depending on how you feel about these other players, if there's not a lot of these mid-range guys that you like, go Najee. If you like the mid-range, then Freiermuth's your guy.
Cool. All right, spread. So let me clear out this lineup. Let's go with your direction on a Pittsburgh win. Like I had Pickett and Pickens in there because I have them playing catch up to Cleveland, which is controlling the ball on the ground pretty much. But which direction do you want to go here for like a Pittsburgh win? What do you kind of envision there?
All right. So per my earlier question, I don't like the mid-range. All right. So I'll throw Najee in at captain. Okay. Then, of course, under this build, we're going to need a big game from the Steelers defense. So I dropped them in there at flex. Of course, if the Steelers win, I think Pickett's here. So with Najee, it's really a choice between Pickett or Pickens. Because I can't get all of them in here. If I go a little Allen Robinson and Freiermuth here. So if my four Steelers are Najee, Steelers defense, Robinson, and Freiermuth, I have 97 left to choose here. Then I can go like a Chubb Cooper or a Watson in Njoku to finish this out.
Yeah, I do like having that option to put Chubb in there. I just think that with Cam Hayward out tonight, I think Chubb is going to just he's had some huge games against Pittsburgh in the past too. I think last year, kind of take a look at some of his performances last year. He ended up getting 77 yards, but also adding 5 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown in one game. And then another game, he had 113 yards and a touchdown. It just seems like Chubb has historically done well against Pittsburgh, and I like having him as an option. I'm looking at 2021. He didn't do very well against them in 2021, but then you go back to 2020. He had 108 yards and a touchdown. Just had some other big games on top of that.
All right. Some other interesting things, and these are, of course, things you sent me, so I'm not the one that found these. But Chubb barely outsnapped Ford last game, huh? 49% to 41%. What do you make of that?
Yeah. That was, I think Ford got most of his snaps in garbage time. So if you think that Cleveland is going to take a significant lead, then don't be afraid to pair up Jerome Ford with Chubb, because it seems like they're going to take a cautious approach with Chubb when they have a huge lead, and they're not going to like run him into the ground because they know what kind of workload he's going to be getting for the rest of the season. So I think any chance that they get to kind of relieve Chubb when the game's out of hand, or like they have a good control of the game, they're going to try to work Jerome Ford in there, or whatever backup happens to be there. Right now, it's currently Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford's an interesting guy because he's only $400 in this showdown. So if you think that Chubb is going to, the Browns are going to blow out Pittsburgh, you could still have Chubb in the captain and throw in a $400 Ford, because if the
Not going
Browns
to take much to pay off, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like he could score, he could get his way into a garbage touchdown or something, or like 50 yards and like a couple receptions, because he's one thing that with the Browns last week is Chubb was more involved in the passing game, like than he typically is too. So that's another interesting thing to keep track of, because like people were thinking that like Ford would be kind of that Kareem Hunt role, but Chubb ended up getting 4 targets last week, and I don't think that Ford got any targets. He just got straight touches. So yeah, that was an interesting, I think, development last week to add to Chubb's upside too. But yeah, what's your projection of a score in this one, spread? How much do you think Cleveland loses by?
All right, let me see let me pull up my projections there. Hold on. Wrong. Where's my projections? Give me 1 second, and I'll give you my exact projection.
Yeah. So one other note too with this game is David Njoku. Now, David Njoku has historically, or at least for the past season or so, he's done well against Pittsburgh. Last season, his 2 games, he went 4 for 42 with a touchdown, and he went 9 for 98 with a touchdown. And one of those games, the 4 for 42 with a touchdown, was with Deshaun Watson against this Pittsburgh team. And I do believe that Njoku has scored in 3 straight games versus Pittsburgh. So he's a guy that they like to use for whatever reason, like in these red zone opportunities, or just against the matchup opportunities against Pittsburgh in general. So that's something that you're going to want to keep an eye on if you're building teams and keeping guys in your player pool. I'm not sure what the ownership's going to be on Njoku. Like, if you wanted to use him as a potential captain, looking down this list, I'll take a look at ownership right now. I see him at 3.5% about as captain ownership. So you could justify, if you think it's going to be a low scoring game and you think that, Cleveland's going to win, or at least, keep it close in a low scoring game, Njoku would make a lot of sense as a captain that you could potentially build around, because he ends up being the leading receiver in this game. If we think that, like it's going to be more of a run heavy game, like spread likes Najee in this game, and I like Chubb, and we both like Chubb in this game. If it's going to be a run heavy game, and let's say that when they get to the red zone, as opposed to Chubb running in touchdowns, they're passing it to Njoku, and maybe Njoku gets a couple, like 10-yard touchdowns or something like that. Like, that could be a build where Njoku ends up as the captain, and then you kind of keep it maybe between, field goals and running backs and stuff like that for the for the rest of the team. Maybe stack him with Deshaun Watson. Maybe Watson, doesn't throw any touchdowns to anyone else, but maybe he's able to get in this lineup through his rushing upside. But that's another interesting guy, I think, in this game.
I wanted to point out something. I don't know if you did it during my absence, but one of the reasons that I want to throw Allen Robinson is another note that you sent to me. He played 83% in the slot last week. So when you're getting that kind of snap share at that price, I definitely think someone that's worth the look. And it's a hard click. How disappointing was he last season? All right, Simon?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like Game of Thrones finale level disappointment there. How bad Allen Robinson was last year.
Yeah, he did have 8 targets last week too. He had 8 targets. He scored 11 fantasy points against the 49ers. And I mean, if we're looking at the slot matchup here for Robinson, it's not a great matchup based on last week in the slot. I think that the worst matchup is on the whoever's ends up aligning on the left side. Could be Pickens. Pickens spends like a good portion of his time actually like split ups. Pickens only had 14 percent of his snaps in the slot last week. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know who do you think takes over for Deontay straight up? This guy Calvin Austin? What do we know about him?
So, me, nothing. I don't count college football. So a lot of times when these guys come in, I need to rely on other people. Do you have any intel on him?
No, I mean he's a rookie, I believe. He had 6 targets last week. He only had 37 yards. Yeah, I don't know much about this guy. He's a guy that you're going to want to research, though. He's only 4,800. I mean, that actually 4,800 seems a little bit pricey for this guy. Not knowing exactly who's going to fill in for Deontay Johnson, but from what I understand, like Calvin Austin was pretty much taking over directly for Deontay Johnson when he went out. So he's interesting. But like Spread was talking about, we also got Robinson, who has that disappointing season last year. The story with Robinson was always, he's always had these bad quarterbacks thrown to him. And, last year he finally had his opportunity to have a good quarterback, and then Stafford went out. But like Robinson hadn't really done anything prior to Stafford going out to make us think that he was going to have a good season. So he was disappointing last year. It could have been a system thing. Who knows? But last week he ended up getting 8 targets, and he took those 8 targets for 64 yards. No touchdown, but it looks like his longest catch went for 31 yards. So, not horrible with Allen Robinson last week. And, we see it all the time with these kind of receivers that we wrote off and we thought were done and dusty and stuff. And they end up coming back, with a new team and coming out of nowhere to have, like some decent performances. So I wouldn't write off Allen Robinson yet, but yeah, I'd like a Spread plugging him into this lineup. I think a direct pivot off of Allen Robinson would be Calvin Austin, though, if you're looking for a cheaper pivot off of Robinson, if you need that salary relief.
And one thing we know is if the Steelers draft you, you're probably a pretty good wide receiver, right? Pretty good track record there at finding the later round talent. Everyone except for the Eagles knew that Justin Jefferson was going to be good. Going back to that Jalen Reagor pick, right? But finding these gems in the 3rd round is something the Steelers have excelled at. So, not the worst place to make a stand on an undiscovered Steelers receiver.
Eagles would be like crazy right now if they had Justin Jefferson, but like it also probably wouldn't have worked out the same way as far as the wheeling and dealing that they've been making for picks over the last couple years if they had him. So I mean this is going to be an interesting game, and I do kind of lean the over, and I'm leaning on the Cleveland side for it. Spread. What's the situation from the betting world with Tomlin coming off these losses and then playing, or playing in primetime games in general? Like what does he tend to do as far as, like how he does against the spread, or like if he typically goes over totals, or like, is there a history there?
It's it's fantastic. It's both more pretty good. Let's talk about this one stat, Simon. You know that Pittsburgh's won 19 of their last 20 games at home against Cleveland. They're also 5-1 against the spread in the last 6 games at home against Cleveland. So not only are they winning these games, they're covering to a point on your over. Over has gone 4 of the last 6 games when playing Pittsburgh. I don't have the Tomlin numbers in front of me, but I'm just from hearing him so many times, I'm pretty sure he's 60% off a loss and 60% as a dog in prime time. So all the trends are going to be going Tomlin's way. It's just, so to me, the Deontay Johnson loss, I know that's tough, especially with this being a fantasy show. But the one that I'm really worried about is Cam Hayward and if they're going to be able to stop that run, because with Cam Hayward out, Nick Chubb becomes such an attractive option here. And if they can get him going, it doesn't matter if Deshaun Watson isn't the top 5 guy that Cleveland thought they were trading for. He just needs to be average if Chubb is getting loose. And with Cam Hayward out of there, the Pittsburgh run defense falls from a top 10 run defense to a bottom 10 run defense. So him and TJ Watt means so much to that defense. With one of them missing, could be a huge game for Nick Chubb. So the trends like Tomlin, but the injuries make it a tough bet to make.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and just to kind of round out, like some of these options that we have for slate, Elijah Moore running primarily out of the slot. We covered him about a bit. We got Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think Peoples-Jones, has a good opportunity with Deontay Johnson being out. I think he's going to try to rise to the occasion because he's in a contract year on top of it. So he's going to take he's not going to take his opportunities lightly, I don't think. But it looked like Deshaun Watson kind of leaning on Elijah Moore was hurting David Njoku a little bit, but just based on Njoku's previous performances against Pittsburgh, he looks like a pretty good bet to at least put up a decent amount of yardage, if not get a touchdown in tonight's game. Browns D, I kind of like Browns D. They're at 4,600. But what spread says about Tomlin's performances after these losses concerns me a little bit as far as the Browns D, because Tomlin is good at coming up with game plans and motivating his teams after these losses. And when you think Pittsburgh sucks is when he comes out of nowhere and pulls out like some big win. And this is at home too on top of it, so that's not good for Pittsburgh for Cleveland's D. Then you got the kickers. The kickers are always options in these games. You don't know, whether it be a shootout game or whether it be a grind out game. Like, the kickers are going to be options here. Jalen Warren, he is looking like he's in a 60-40 split with Najee Harris, so he's a good option there. Harrison Bryant had decent week last week. He got 2 targets and scored a touchdown. So he's always an option. He's only at 2,200. I don't like him too much. Maybe he's a little bit pricey at 2,200. Like to see him like around $1,000, $1,500 range. And then beyond that, I don't see anyone too far down on this. Marquise Goodwin. Marquise Goodwin might be interesting with Cooper going out. Oh, Tillman, dude. This guy, Cedric Tillman, is going to be interesting tonight, and he's only $200. So if they decide with Amari Cooper, if he ends up sitting, if Amari Cooper is out, then Cedric Tillman is going to be very interesting at $200 because he was a guy that was having some buzz in the preseason. He's a guy that Tyler and I both like. Tyler talked about him when he came on one of the best ball shows about how he was drafting Tillman in the 18th round, and I was doing the same. But I do like Tillman's upside, but I've kind of taken some shots on these cheap guys in this week 1, week 2 of Showdown, like just because we don't know how things are going to break. But it hasn't broke my way yet. But maybe Tillman might be interesting if you find yourself in a situation where you only have a couple $100 of salary and you want to get in a bunch of studs. So I think as far as that, David Bell might be interesting too. I don't know what kind of role that he's going to play with Deontay being out. David Bell is a guy that was getting a ton of buzz last year in the preseason. A lot of best ball drafting was pushing him pretty high in best ball drafts. Let's see. His analysis from last week says that Bell was on the field for 10 plays, the same number as rookie Cedric Tillman and veteran Marquise Goodwin. And the trio will make up the second tier behind Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, and Donovan Peoples-Jones. So if Amari Cooper is out, kind of take your pick on Tillman, Goodwin, and and Bell. But like I would lean Goodwin or Tillman, I think, in that situation. Although you never know, the Bell being the veteran, like they could decide to give him some run.
I think you had a great breakdown there of a lot of the lower options. And one thing that I wanted to point out, when you talk about quarterbacks preferring a certain guy, they might not actually prefer it. It might be the defense that preferred it, right? And maybe that's what happened in week 1 was the Bengals said, we'd rather have Elijah Moore. We feel like we match up better with him rather than Njoku. So he gets a little more coverage than usual, and it's not the Deshaun's who went, boy, I think Elijah is so much better than David Njoku, right? It's saying, boy, Njoku's getting a lot of attention, and you can't cover everybody, you can't double everybody. So now Elijah's getting the premier matchup. So especially 1 week in, I'm really hesitant to feel like, oh well, just because they targeted this guy a bunch of times in week 1, that's his new favorite. It could have been, instead of it being Deshaun's favorite, it was the Bengals defensive quarterback. What's his name? Lou Amarana. I always pronounce his name wrong. Anyways, he might have made that choice rather than Deshaun. So just because the guy didn't have a high target share in week 1, I'm not necessarily hesitant to go back to him if I had high priors on him. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to have Njoku in this lineup tonight.
Yeah. And no, that makes total sense with the defensive coordinator of the Bengals. He's a dude's a stud in the defensive coordinator world. So would totally make sense if he decided to take Deontay Johnson out last decided to take Njoku out last week. So good breakdown there, Spread. Where can people find you, and where can people find what you have cooking for your content?
Just follow me at Spread a Stare on X. And you were talking to me before, Simon. Maybe I'll be giving out a TikTok here pretty soon. But right now, everything's going on Twitter/X. I'm at Spread a Stare. You can find all my content there.
Yeah, and you can follow me at Pumacom. Follow at Heat Seeker Sports. You can do us a favor, subscribe to this YouTube channel. We need all the subscribers we can get. And if you like the video, that would be great. Engagement helps us out in the YouTube algorithms. And until next time, good luck, Spread tonight, and we will see you again soon.